Nuclear deterrence is essential for our protection, but nuclear deterrence only protects us if it's perfect. And nuclear deterrence has been far from perfect. Proponents of nuclear weapons look at the Cold War and they look at these crises and they say, nuclear deterrence has worked every time. I snuck the Gulf War in here. It's not really in the Cold War, but it's a really good example, so we're going to make an exception. But seeing this as an unblemished record of success is a singular misreading of the evidence. Consider Cuba. I sat in the office of a very distinguished man from Harvard who had served in government and out in the Kennedy School. And he said to me, Ward, come on, look at Cuba. It proves that deterrence works because the Soviets put the missiles into Cuba, there was a risk of nuclear war, and they took them out. And I flapped my mouth feebly. And then a month later, it occurred to me what I should have said. You know, that I wish I did that. What about Kennedy? Because Kennedy knew that if he took action in Cuba, either blockading the island or using airstrikes, that he risked nuclear war. They talked about it 60 times in the meetings, the secret deliberations they had before they decided what to do. They knew they were risking nuclear war, and yet they went ahead. If nuclear deterrence means that a leader sees a risk of nuclear war and then pulls back, how do we explain Kennedy's decision? Don't get me wrong, I like Kennedy. I memorized his speeches as a kid. I think he did far better than anyone else would have. I just don't think nuclear deterrence is the be-all and end-all. Take the 1973 Middle East War. Proponents talk about Henry Kissinger putting U.S. nuclear forces on alert to warn the Soviets not to send troops to Egypt. See, they say, nuclear deterrence works. But what about Sadat and Assad? What were they thinking? Everyone knew that Israel had nuclear weapons. It had been reported in the New York Times. Any attack on Israel can quickly become an existential one. You break through in the Golan Heights, you can be in Tel Aviv the same day. So what were the leaders of Egypt and Syria thinking? Why didn't Israel's nuclear weapons prevent them from launching a war? Take the Gulf War. Kevin Chilton, one-time commander of all U.S. nuclear forces, in an article in Strategic Studies Quarterly said that the Gulf War is proof that deterrence works. Secretary of State James Baker threatens Saddam Hussein in a letter he sends. He says, if you use chemical or biological weapons, the United States will have recourse to means of great force and whatever the euphemism is, I don't remember. And everyone considers that to be successful use of nuclear deterrence. But as we all know, if you look closely at Baker's letter, he actually drew 3 red lines in the sand. Don't use chemical or biological weapons. Don't set the oil wells on fire. Don't make terroristic attacks against our friends and allies, Israel. And yet, as we all know, Saddam crossed 2 of those red lines, setting the oil wells on fire and firing Scud missiles into Israel. So, in baseball, if you get a hit a third of the time, you're doing really well. You can make a lot of money batting .333 in baseball, professional baseball, but nuclear deterrence is not baseball. Being successful in nuclear deterrence 1/3 of the time is not nearly good enough. Because the consequences of any failure could be catastrophic, nuclear deterrence has to be perfect or vanishingly close to perfect. And again, if you examine the record, and I've only talked about a few of the things here, there's more, you find failures of nuclear deterrence. You find leaders acting in risky and aggressive ways when they were confronted with the risk of nuclear war. Those failures didn't lead to nuclear war, obviously, but that was the result of luck or happenstance, not because nuclear deterrence works like magic. Nuclear deterrence is essential for our protection, but nuclear deterrence has to be perfect if it's going to protect us, and it's been far from perfect.